Tonight on the show, we are speaking with a passionate science communicator and conservationist who specialises in native bees. She is the owner and manager of Bees Business, a company that educates the community about native bees and other beneficial insects. And as the founder of Australian Pollinator Week, she has a lot to tell us about bees. Welcome to the Citizen Science Show podcast, Dr. Megan Halcroft.
Hi, Danny. Thanks very much for having me.
You are so welcome, Megan. Thank you for joining the show. Can we start back at your story and how you found your way to the world of bees?
So I started a Bachelor of Horticultural Science. I was a nurse at the time, and I did that course, and one of the units was apiculture, so honeybees, which I found fascinating. But there was a couple of assignments that we had to do, and that was on alternative pollinators, and overseas they used alternative pollinators quite a bit in crop production. Then when I finished my undergraduate, I was offered a honours project looking at Astroplebia australis, which is a stingless bee, social stingless bee. We were to look at how they would cope with a new honeybee pest that had recently entered Australia, and that's the small hive beetle. So I fell in love with these beautiful, gorgeous 4.5 millimetre bees. And then I was offered to do a PhD on that bee. And I looked at them as alternative pollinators for crop production. Yeah, it's just gone from there, really. When I finished my PhD, there was very little, well, there's almost no money in the science for native bees, and that was in 2013. And I lived in the lower Blue Mountains, and there was just no opportunity to progress with that research. So I thought, well, I've learnt all this information about stingless bees, but also all about the other bees, because I had to do literature reviews for all of the different things that I studied on this bee. And so I was like, well, I guess I could go and tell some gardeners how important bees are. And then, yeah, it just progressed from there, and I got my first paid gig in Young for a land care group, and I was the guest speaker. So I got paid accommodation and my dinner, and I thought that was awesome to tell them all about bees.
I think I actually met you just after you'd completed your PhD, and you were presenting at a seminar that was being run at the University of Western Sydney. And at the time, there were quite a few emerging native bee scientists and some well-established scientists in that field. And I remember sitting there and thinking, we have only just begun to touch the surface of our native bees. And I know Dr. Anne Dolan has been in that space for a long time with Aussie Bees and putting out newsletters. But in terms of the scientific organisations and the number of scientists involved in that space, it seemed to be just starting. So how did Australian Pollinator Week come about? What was it that made you think this was needed?
So when you met me, that was at the end of a project I'd been given with the Western Sydney University, and it was funded by the Environmental Trust. And it was called Be Aware of Your Native Bees. And I actually met you at one of the community gardens.
That's right. I dragged my daughter out, and you had us sweep netting bees and chilling them down and taking photos. She was fascinated by that. So was I.
That's it.
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And that was my first real experience with trying to teach people about the importance of bees. And of course, I was learning too, because my specialty was stingless bees. And so I hadn't actually done I've done a lot of reading and I knew a lot of background to the solitary bees, but I hadn't really dealt with them. And this project gave me so much information and so much opportunity to teach people, but I would learn as well while I was at it. And so that project went for a year. Toward the end of it, Jen, who was the manager of the Office of Sustainability, and she was the manager of the project sort of thing, she said, you've got money left over, because I can't count anything to do with money, is just, you may as well just give it up. So she's going, you've got money left over. What do you want to do with it? And during my PhD, there was times where a friend of mine, Jenny, who was also a student studying stingless bees, in the middle of June and July, Pollinator Week was being celebrated in the Northern Hemisphere. So we'd get in there and she'd have her hat and the bees all over it, and I'd put my antennae on and my fluffy jumper, and we'd be trying to tell people, it's Pollinator Week, and it was cold and rainy, and so it was like, no. And so when she said, what do you want to do with this money I got? Oh, it's Pollinator Week. She had to apply to reuse that money in this way. So in that time, I think that was about 3 weeks, she had to go through that. We organised Pollinator Week. I did all these resources and colouring in stuff and built a website. My husband, thank goodness, that's his hobby, is just IT, loves playing with websites. So he booked this, added Pollinator Week to my website. Yeah, so that was our first encounter with Australian Pollinator Week. And that's why I call it Australian Pollinator Week, because it's in November, in our spring, not overseas, or not in the Northern Hemisphere.
When did we have our first Australian Pollinator Week then?
That was in 2015.
Oh, 10 years.
26 events were registered on the website. It was so successful that our case study was written up by the Environmental Trust and went into their little book. Such a successful project that they'd funded, which was pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah. So 10 years on, how has it grown?
Well, it has a lot. We're trying now to grow it, but it's hard for people to sort of remember that 2019, I was invited to attend the Ween Bee Foundation's ambassador program. And I was quite hesitant because basically they were very much into honeybees. And I said to Fiona, who was the CEO, I said, I don't think they're going to like me being there, because I'm going to tell them that honeybees aren't good for native bees, especially feral colonies, and that they're massive competition for our native bees. And she said, that's all right. They'll have to learn that, won't they? Anyway, so I went along, and then I thought, they might be able to help support Australian Pollinator Week. So I gave them a little presentation and all that sort of thing. And Fiona came back to me a few weeks later and said, would you like us to take custodianship of Australian Pollinator Week? And I'm going, yes, somebody hand me a platter. Give it to you on a platter, please, a little gold dust and stuff. So, yeah, it has grown. It's got its own website, standalone website now. It's so much prettier than what we had. Lots of information. There's a place that you can register your events, and it goes on a map, and then everybody can see what's going on. And we started a steering committee this year to try and grow it. So there's me as the founder, but also I'm the president of the Australian Native Bee Association. So I'm the representative for that organisation on the steering committee as well. And then there's Invertebrates Australia, Land Care, and Ween Bee of Ween Bee. So we're just trying to grow it through sharing with other organisations that are like-minded.
In terms of growing, are you looking for more events to be registered around the country to happen during Pollinator Week, or is it more you're looking for individuals to sign up and participate somehow? Like,
yeah,
what do we actually do in Australian Pollinator Week?
That's right. Well, there's all sorts of things you can do, and there's examples on the website. You can do art projects. There was one year I was involved, and we did this magnificent art project. They brought in all of these people who helped with guidance from artists to build these chandelier type structures with leaves that were made out of clay, and they were symbolising leafcutter bees. Then there was one that was a rammed earth. It was kind of like an adobe big sausage of clay, and I think she shaved her dog, and she used that to mat it together and to hold all the clay, but also so it wasn't really, really heavy. And I also brought in some clay that had been utilised by some blue-banded bees, or banded amygdala, which is more correct. And it would have had some pheromone on it, so we were hoping that would help to attract them. And then there was one that had hollow bamboo that was also like a wind-chime almost. And they were then hung in the Botanic Gardens at Pictou. It was, a magnificent thing. So that was one of the awesome events that we held.
Art and science coming together. Is there a pollinator count? Do we have to do counts during this week?
There is an Australian pollinator count. However, we've set it up and you actually have to do a little quiz. So you need to learn about the pollinators and do a little quiz so that we know that you know what you're talking about. And therefore that data is verified.
Right.
Unlike the wild pollinator count that used to be, we don't have the people to be able to verify photos or anything like that. So it's up to people to prove to us before they even do the count that they know the difference between a fly and a wasp and a bee and a honeybee. And so it's about 13 different type elements to learn. And then people learn from that, which I think is what we want. We don't want people just rattling off stuff and not actually learning from it, because that doesn't actually benefit anybody.
And is this happening now? So it's got its own website, or it's all part of the Australian Pollinator Week?
It's on the Australian Pollinator Week website.
Okay.
The problem is, because you have to go and do a test and everything like that, people go on, and apparently they can see that people go on that won't then go and progress onto the count.
No. Well, I guess these days a lot of people are taking photos and they're being a citizen scientist and uploading images of pollinators from their backyards into iNaturalist. So then it gets verified by that community.
Yeah, that's right.
So I guess you possibly need to merge it into a project on iNaturalist somehow.
We need some funding to do that thing, and we want to do it. And we also want to be able to have it not just on Pollinator Week, like that's just a week. And we need people to be able to stimulate people's interest to do this sort of, and really I think what Pollinator Week is at the moment is hopefully it is actually piquing people's interest, and they'll go, oh, actually, I'm going to go and take some photos and upload them to iNaturalist. And for us, that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. I want people to learn about the incredible insects in their garden, because a lot of people have phobias about insects. They're either a yuck factor or a scaredy factor. And if we don't understand how important they are to our ecosystem and what different jobs they have and how to support their populations, then we're going to be in strife even more than we already are.
So are there resources on the Weenbee Australian Pollinator Week website now for people to learn about our pollinators and things they can do to support them? Yeah?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
The Australian Pollinator count, even if you don't do the count, you can go in there and you can learn the difference between flies and stuff, how to identify them. There's some videos of me. There's a whole big video that goes through the whole learning guide, or we can just pick and choose. There's just short videos, very lighthearted. Yeah, I think I was on drugs that day.
You are a nurse by trade initially.
Oh, that's it, yeah.
A nurse into bees and now into pollinators.
That's it.
So as a nurse, okay, taking your nursing, caring, compassionate nature there, what is it that Australians can do during Australian Pollinator Week to support pollinators?
Knowledge. Gain more knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a Facebook group, which is Be Aware of Your Native Bees, which stemmed from that first project that I did when I finished my PhD. It's especially now that we've got activity, it's spring and there's all sorts of things going on. There is massive information coming in and out of there all the time. And people can just go on there. If they've taken a photo, they can upload it. If it's not a very good photo, it doesn't matter. Often you can actually identify basically what it is, certainly if it's a fly or a wasp or a bee. But then people discuss, how do you make a bee hotel? Look after the bees that nest in the ground. So 70% of our bees nest in the ground. And people, because we're in Australia and we've basically been taught to mulch everything within an inch of its life, we've got to try and remember that our bees are only small, they're small insects, and many of them are only about 5 to 10 millimetres long, and they nest in the ground. And if we've got mulch that's 2 or 3 inches thick, they're not going to be able to dig through that to get to the ground to where they need to nest and reproduce their offspring.
Okay, so we can be building some native bee hotels for the stem nesting bees. We can be clearing away some mulch potentially in areas of our yard to expose bare earth so our ground nesting bees can nest there.
Yep.
What about the other pollinators? What about our butterflies and flies and wasps? What can we do for them?
Either reduce or don't use any pesticides. That includes herbicides when especially if those plants are in flower. If you spray herbicide over flowers, the bees that visit the flowers to collect pollen and nectar can actually be killed by the herbicide liquid, even if it's not an insecticide. People don't realise that.
Mm.
No pesticides and planting lots of flowering plants. So incorporating at least some natives. I know sometimes it's quite hard to get natives, especially inexpensively, unless you've got a native community nursery for tube stock. A lot of our native bees really just prefer to visit native flowering plants. But there are a lot of our native bees who will visit exotics. So what I've got a heap of native plants that survive here. We're in Hampton. It's a very harsh climate here. And whatever survives, I put more of in.
Yeah.
And that includes exotics. So I will put in exotics that will help to protect the natives that are a little bit temperamental from the harsh winds and snow. And then, I just, whatever survives and attracts pollinators, I put more in. And the other thing we can do, people don't really think about it. At the moment, we're very dry. And the best thing you can do for your pollinators at the moment is water your flowering plants. Because without water in the soil, the plants can't produce nectar or viable pollen.
I was just having a quick look at the Ween Bee Foundation Australian Pollinator website, and I can see they're actually running during Pollinator Week a pollinator photography competition. There's a school art competition. There's actually quite a few events and activities already up there, and plenty of resources to learn about not just our native bees and ways to identify them, but some of the other pollinators as well. So when exactly is Australian Pollinator Week?
Each year it's the second full week of November. This year it's from the 8th to the 16th. And we're greedy. We've taken both weekends on each end.
Because you do clash with you clash with Australian Frog ID Week.
It's not really clashing.
You're complementing each other on your second week in November. And it's spring and everything's out and about. The animals are out making lots of noise.
Yeah.
They're very visible, all flittering around looking for mates or feeding their babies. You also have National Recycling Week happening in that week. So I imagine the citizen scientists are activated, very activated. Okay.
Well, they're out there anyway.
True.
May as well be taking some photos of insects and learning about them as well.
Okay. So for people that are sitting at home thinking, well, I've never actually done any citizen science, but this Pollinator Week sounds good. Do they need any special skills or tools? I know you mentioned they need a little bit of knowledge to do the uploading, but in terms of participating in some of the other events or just getting involved, is there anything else they should know about?
Well, not really. So if you go onto the website, you need to be able to sort of navigate the tabs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the resources, you go into the resources and there's things like how to build a bee hotel, or it's a nesting space for pollinators, how to create a pollinator habitat. And then there's some ideas on some art and things to just get together. You can do it with your school, or you can do it with your neighbours, your local retirement village. Can help planting more plants.
So just get creative, get your hands dirty, get your cameras out, snap the pollinators in your backyards, water those native plants, put some in, build those hotels, leave a bit of head dearth for the native bees to nest in, because they will start to nest very soon, won't they?
Oh, they'll be nesting already, yep.
Yeah. So if you could change one thing in Australia right now to help conserve our pollinators, what would it be?
Stop the massive land clearing.
Ooh.
There's supposed to be laws and, restrictions on land clearing, but it's still happening. And that's on a big scale. But even on a small scale, there's habitat. 30% of our bees nest in pre-existing cavities like old borer holes, rotting wood, under bark, hollow stems, under mulch. And as we tidy up, whether it be on the broader scale, as in land clearing and then turning it into just monoculture, or in your backyard where you're making everything pristine and tidy, well, every time you mow or every time you clear away those tufts of grass or put mulch on to make it look pretty, you're potentially removing habitat, which is where they will reproduce their offspring to increase the populations and continue the biodiversity which is required to drive our ecosystems.
And pollinate our food.
Look, even if it's not about our food security, however, native bees do take part in that. If there is food being produced and there's natural habitat in that area, a lot of our orchard areas, so around Orange and Bathurst, where there's apple and pear, cherry and all that, a lot of those small scale, they're not broad acre, massive production areas compared to some of our broad acre food production areas. They often have remnant vegetation sort of spotted in between the properties, and that's where the native bees will hang out during the time when the crops aren't in flower. If we can ensure that our farmers are not using pesticides while the flowers are in bloom, and try and incorporate integrated pest management to reduce the amount of pesticides necessary, we will have a better food security. But then there's the biodiversity that we're trying to support by supporting our insects. So you've got your pollinators, but you've also got your predators, your wasps that lay their eggs in grubs that eat the roots of the plants that you want to grow. There's other tiny wasps that lay their eggs in aphids, and then lady beetles that eat aphids, and hoverflies that eat aphids, and then there's other ecosystem services like flies that lay their eggs in brackish water, and those larvae actually help to filter that brackish water and clean the water systems.
Wow.
So there's so much complexity, and by using pesticides, we break all of those cycles. We disrupt the natural predations that our native insects live on.
That's amazing, isn't it? When you start to look, even in your backyard, it's incredible to see the interactions between insects, plants, and the services that they do provide to our ecosystems and to ourselves. I think they are very much underrated, and they deserve a lot more attention, and that's where Australian Pollinator Week is going to help to raise the profile, raise awareness of our incredible pollinators out there and the work that they do for us. I really hope that the partnership, the steering committee that you've formed with Landcare, with Invertebrates Australia, with the Ween Bee Foundation, I hope you can all put these incredible programs together and just keep going and producing a bigger and better Pollinator Week for Australia.
Thank you.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in the future. I mean, how many citizen scientists do you estimate get involved in Australian Pollinator Week?
I hope thousands, but I don't know.
What's the reach? The reach must be huge.
Yeah, I don't know. So the thing is, we don't know because a lot of people just do their Pollinator Week stuff, and you don't know unless it's posted somewhere, or because people aren't registering it with the website. That is for us to be able to have people register their events on the website. It promotes their event, but it also helps us, if we want to apply for funding to grow, so let's say the Australian Pollinator count, we need proof that we're reaching the public, and by having events registered, we've got that proof. Data. Gotta love a bit of data.
So we need citizen scientists and we need the data.
Yeah, well, we need to be educating our citizen scientists so that the data is viable. And that's why the whole way we've set up the Australian Pollinator count, although it's a bit daunting for some, it is validating that data, because people are showing that they know the difference between a fly and a bee and a wasp.
And it only takes them, is it how many minutes a day to do a pollinator count for a week? What do they need to do? Just observe a plant? And
2 minutes.
2 minutes a day. So that's even less than bird count, which is happening this week. It's all happening spring in Australia. Go, citizen scientists are so busy. So it's something to look into if you're prepared to invest a little bit of time to get educated before you sign up and start counting your pollinators, visiting your chosen flower or plant. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you, Megan. It's worth doing. Like you said, we are in the Southern Hemisphere. We're different to the Northern Hemisphere, and we are so unique in Australia, and we've got a huge array of pollinators, and we're still discovering them daily, new species all the time. So there's nothing stopping us. Citizen scientists, get out there. You might even find a new species. Who knows? You could even get one named after yourself.
We had that group, the Facebook group. We had Gary, who's one of our avid posters, and he's in WA, and he goes on these long journeys to find bees, hunting bees, and he has just had a bee named after him, because he and Terry Houston, who's the Western Australian Museum taxonomist there, they've been communicating, and he managed to find this bee that Terry's been looking for such a long time. And, he got it named after him.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you know what the count is currently for described native bee species in Australia?
I think it's something like 1,647.
Okay.
But it's changing all the time, because every time they do a revision, they synonymise or add. So they're not, some species will be sort of brought together and some species will be added. So it's sort of constantly fluxing. But there's always the fact that, there's so many specimens sitting in the museums that haven't even been described. They're just sitting there. They haven't been described. And then there's bees that are constantly being discovered when these really dedicated scientists go out to places like in biodiversity hotspots, and they'll find, and especially, the southern BioBlitz, there's usually at least a couple of bees discovered during that time as well. They estimate that we've probably got about 2,000 species of native bee in Australia.
Amazing. Final question. Do you have a favourite bee?
Well, I really do have to say Austroplebia australis, because it is the bee that I studied for all that time, but I can't keep that bee anymore because I live in a cold climate. And so that means that Lasioglossum lanarium, which is common as muck, and it will forage on pretty much anything. They call some of these bees trash bees because they'll eat anything. But I can always rely on Lasioglossum lanarium rocking up on an 8-degree morning, first thing in spring, and it's like, yes, you're here. Oh, dandelions are in flower. Nothing else in, and look at you, you're on there. Good on you.
There you go, trash bee, also known as Lasioglossum lanarium. Yeah. It's a good day when Megan sees one of them. Yeah. Thank you so much, Megan. I just love your passion for native bees, and I wish you all the best for the future of Australian Pollinator Week.
Thank you so much, Danny. Thanks for sharing with everyone.